So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Naruto fanfiction. So we are back with a brand new movie on what if FEM Naruto got harem with Kunoichi, Adrien in movie. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. Naru was jolted awake when her stomach suddenly flipped and the feeling of falling encompassed her. Her eyes shot open only for them to water as air blew into them. Her eyes widened as panic shot through her. A weird-looking place with weird buildings was fast approaching. She was falling. A short scream left her mouth and she flailed in the air a bit. Her hair whipped around her and her mind was going haywire in an attempt to find a way to save herself. Her survival instincts kicked in and she built up chakra around her arm and landed in an awkward handstand position. As she pushed the chakra out through the tenketsu in her hand, she was launched back into the air, although not nearly high enough for her to worry. Naru landed on all fours instead of 2 feet as she had intended. It was then that a glint caught her attention. Turning a look at it, her eyes widened. Her reflection stared back at her in equal shock, proving that she wasn't seeing things. Her hair was the same as it used to be, but now she had a pair of black fox ears with white tips on her head. Her skin had paled slightly and now, instead of her normal sapphire blue eyes, she had royal purple eyes with faint flecks of red. Her canines had lengthened and now poked out of her lip if she smiled. She also appeared to have de-aged a bit from her previous 17 years to about 11 to 12. She guessed 11 because of the height. She hit a growth spurt when she was 12 and that was the only reason she knew the difference. A twitch of an appendage that shouldn't be there drew her attention to a swaying black hair with a white tip that connected to her tailbone. Although it will merge us. Kurama's voice echoed in her head and she immediately cursed. She hadn't really been listening and now she was facing the consequences. Fuck. Just my Lou. Her new ears twitched slightly as she heard voices, although she couldn't understand them. Dread froze her in her spot. It was just now setting in that she had no clue where she was, and it was now made perfectly clear that no one would be able to understand her if she couldn't understand them. What language did she speak anyway? Did it even have a name? With a shrug, she got to her feet and grimaced. I need to get my chakra control up or someone's going to see these. I wish I could just make them disappear. As if by magic, the tail and ears disappeared from the reflection in the window. Her eyes remained the same, as did her elongated canines and paled complexion. Reaching a hand up, she could still feel them, but they weren't visible anymore, which she found kind of weird. With another shrug, she stepped out of what she assumed was a large alleyway and, after glancing around to make sure that she couldn't see, hear or smell anyone else, crouched down before leaping. She miscalculated by a lot and shot above the roof that she intended to land on. I can't control this body. What the hell, she thought, alarmed at all of the sudden changes. As she descended, she landed as she did before, on all fours. Note to self, learn to land on 2 feet again, she mumbled in annoyance. She needed to find a library. If she could find something, anything, that could help her at least try to learn about this place, then it'd be there. After about 2 hours of cautiously jumping over the rooftops, she found her target. Glad she was at least a somewhat decent actress, Naru entered the huge building. Only to gape at the sheer amount of books in building. Hiding between 2 of the deserted bookshelves, she created 100 shadow clones and had them hinge into different people. All right ladies, we need to find something that we can understand. Look for a book that is written in our language and dispel once or if you find one. After that, I want groups of 5 to go around and try to find out what language others are speaking. Then find some language books and start learning. She put emphasis on the word learning because she didn't have time to screw around right now. A unified salute followed before they all split off. It wasn't as long as she'd expected until 2 of her clones dispelled suddenly. From the book it had found, the language she spoke was called Japanese to these people. The other had found out that the place she was called Paris and was in a country called France. The language they spoke was French. All of the remaining clones then diverted their attention to books for learning French. Naru sighed. It's gonna be a long day. 12 hours later, the past hours had only dragged on, but she now had a decent grasp on the language. She had to thank whatever god that existed for shadow clones. 100 people learning a language got a lot more done than just one. It was dark by the time she left the library. She could still see well even in the badly lit darkness. She didn't dwell on that fact for long and was soon back on the rooftops. Deciding that it wouldn't hurt, she let her new appendages appear. As she was jumping from building to building, a worried thought wouldn't leave her alone. What was she going to do about living arrangements? Naru's thoughts were cut short by an alarmed shout. From her perch on the building ledge, she could see a head of short blonde hair. A tallish boy had tripped in the darkness. There was no one else around the immediate area and he seemed around her age, so she guessed he was lost. Knowing she wouldn't forgive herself if she left him there, she jumped down and somehow managed to land on her feet instead of all fours like earlier. The boy's body visibly stiffened when her feet made contact with the ground. He spun around and her amethyst gaze met a pair of emeralds. The blonde male took notice of the person's strange accent but didn't comment on it. The boy's eyes widened as they followed the swaying tail behind her before they trailed up to the twitching ears on her ear. Wah. He apparently didn't know what to think. She smiled softly as he shuffled back nervously. Don't worry, I will not hurt you. Are you lost? She asked gently. He didn't answer her immediately, but the embarrassed look that crossed his face told her all she needed to know. Deciding to put her new advanced senses to use, Naru appeared behind the blonde boy in a split second and had embraced him in a tight hug. She sniffed his neck silently and watched, amused, as his face flushed to a bright red color. Pulling back a bit, she shifted her grip so that she had him around the waist. Excuse me, he ended with a shout of alarm as she launched them onto the rooftops. She wasn't even fully sure what she was doing. She decided that following his scent would be the best course of action, but she was new to this, so she was worried of going to the wrong place. She did have to admit that the boy did smell pretty nice though. Brushing off the weird thoughts, she made quick time with arriving at the location that his scent led back to. She couldn't help but gape as she set the boy down on his own 2 feet but made sure to keep him upright because he wobbled as soon as he stood on his own. The house in front of her wore huge. He was a rich boy. He certainly didn't act like one. I guess looks can be deceiving. So, is this the right place? Do you live here? She asked as she turned back to the boy once he had regained his balance. He stared at her strangely but didn't seem as nervous as before despite them literally just jumping over rooftops. Yeah. How? He asked after finally clearing his mind. This girl had just appeared and had did something that shouldn't be possible, and yet here she was, acting so casually. Wait. You need to get inside, right? 1 second. Before B could even get another word out, she had him by the waist once again and had vaulted over the large gate and through the window that he'd snuck out from earlier in the day. She didn't even spare him a glance as she began looking around his room with undisguised curiosity. Her ears twitched when she heard him mutter troublesome under his breath, and her ear immediately clenched painfully as she thought of the deceased Shikamaru. Biting her lip to distract herself, she put on a fake smile. So kid, what's your name anyway? She spoke up finally, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. He jumped before replying. Why, you're just a kid as well. My name's Adrien. Adrien Agreste. And yours? He asked with a slight tinge of annoyance in his tone at being called a kid. She smirked a bit, which showed off her gleaming canines. So you don't like being called a kid? She said randomly. After a minute of thinking, she regained her smirk and walked until she stood right in front of the make blonde. How about kitten then? She purred as their eyes locked. Adrien couldn't look away from her mischievous gaze. His blush made her raise an eyebrow and she chuckled. Well then kitten, my name is Naru, she replied before stepping past him and making a jump for the open window. As she landed on the ledge, Adrien shouted out to her, Will I ever see you again? He asked with a surprisingly happy expression. Naru's own expression softened. It was like looking at a young her all over again. He wanted a friend. She could recognize the desperate gleam in his eyes anywhere. Only time will tell. Maybe I'll come and visit, but don't get your hopes up kitten. See ya. And then she was gone. Naru, who was back on the rooftops, smiled at the thought of her new friend. She glanced back at the huge house that was slowly shrinking as she got further away. Adrien Agreste. What an interesting boy, she thought as she disappeared into the shadows below. Naru glanced down at a certain blonde boy who was currently squeezing her waist to death. He was half asleep at that current moment. Adrien's father, Gabriel Agreste, had been working him too hard, and this was the result. He never used to be like this, but then his wife disappeared and his heart was frozen in a block of ice that would most likely never be thawed. Adrien had been devastated. He'd bawled his eyes out whenever she was around. He would never let his father catch him crying. He'd get told to stop because he was being weak. Gabriel's disregard for his only son's health set a deep hatred for the man in her heart. This boy was the only one she could truly trust in this world, and she wouldn't forgive the foolish man if something were to ever happen to him. She honestly didn't know what made her so overly protective of Adrien. She didn't question it though. The feeling she felt when she was around him made her very happy, and he always seemed to be able to make her relax even if she was really angry beforehand. She remembered meeting the teen before her as if it was yesterday. That was 1 year ago now, and the pair were both 12. Naru sighed before a slight noise caught her attention. Quietly creating a shadow clone, she switched places with it as to not wake the slumbering boy. After making sure that he stayed asleep, she crept out of Adrien's room and towards the noise. As she peeked around the corner, She noticed that Gabriel's office door was open slightly, creeping towards the door. She arrived just in time to see the man press certain spots on a picture of his wife before the floor opened up and he disappeared beneath it. It was only then did she notice the slight energy coming from behind the painting. She waited a minute more to make sure he wasn't coming back before making her way in and over to the painting. She prodded it for a moment before deciding to give it an experimental tug. Click. The painting swung open to reveal a cupboard of sorts. Within was a book, a blue brooch and a picture of Mrs. Agreste. The energy, which she couldn't put a name to, was originating from both the comb and the book. Without really thinking about it, she grabbed the two items and quickly sealed them inside a storage seal on her wrist. A quiet vibration was heard and she immediately closed the secret cupboard and ran out of the room. Just in time as well. Gabriel emerged from the secret entrance in the ground. Naru pressed her back against the wall and froze when he spoke. His hand reached out and traced a finger down the painted face of his wife. I will bring you back. I will gain the ultimate power. I need those miraculous. For some reason the tone of his voice sent an irrational fear pulsing through her. Before he had a chance to emerge from the room, she silently ran back to Adrien's room. She didn't know what the man was planning, but whatever it was, it couldn't be good. Miraculous. I wonder what they are. These miraculous. She entered Adrien's room and found her clone tucking him into bed. She knew that staying around him probably wasn't a good idea. There had already been a few close calls where she had nearly been discovered. She'd managed to hide or get away in time, but she didn't know how long she could keep that up either. Pursing her lips, she walked over to the blonde preteen and brushed some hair out of his face. He really was a looker. She would have done anything to keep him by her side a week ago, but she realized that, if she was discovered, it could affect both of them badly. They'd be separated whether they liked it or not, so she decided to do it sooner rather than later. She hadn't predicted the boy to wake up though. His eyes fluttered open and he stared at her with a tired gaze. Adrien reached out and caught her hand with a small smile which wasn't returned. I should go. You won't be seeing me anymore, she said softly enough that he had to strain his ears to hear her. He was wide awake in moments and had bolted upright. What? No, don't leave, he exclaimed, his grip on her wrist tightening, but she looked unfazed. She stared straight into his eyes as she spoke. It's for the best. No matter what you say, I've come to realize that the consequences of my discovery will be a hard blow to you and your family. I'm not normal. I can't let you become endangered because of my selfishness, she said in an emotionless tone. No, wait, please don't leave. I need why. He was cut off by a pair of soft lips on his own. His emerald eyes widened as Naru kissed him. She used his sudden shock to her advantage and ran her chakra over his body to temporarily shock and immobilize him. Adrien's body went slack as she pulled away from the kiss. His eyes were wide and pleading, but she turned her gaze away. As she jumped over to the window, she turned. Her eyes were full of tears and she bore a sad and slightly scared smile. This is for your own good. I don't even know my own power anymore. Goodbye, kitten, she said quickly and jumped away, her shoulders shaking and tears pouring down her cheeks. She had been planning this for a while. She'd noticed things that he'd tried to hide. Her new strength was unpredictable and she had accidentally hurt him a few times, which washed her with waves of guilt. She'd broken a lot of things when she was angry. She, even when she had a grasp on her emotions, could break things without even trying. She needed to learn to control this power. A small part of her mind wondered how the Bijou regulated their power. The thought was quickly drowned by her sadness. She still hadn't figured out why it hurt to leave him. As she hopped the roofs at high speeds, she didn't notice a pair of wise gray eyes gazing at her from a nearby building. A small green creature floated next to him and was glowing faintly. Time skip 1 week. Naru had gone back to hiding her features not long after her last encounter with her kitten. She was currently walking down the busy street with no real destination in sight. She was in desperate need for some money and accommodation, but she didn't know what to do. Luck seemed to be on her side though. A large crowd had formed a little ways away from her position. She blinked, a little surprised, as she approached the crowd that had congregated in front of the Eiffel Tower. After a bit of maneuvering, she managed to get to the front of the crowd and gazed at the large stage-like platform that had been set up. A tall man with purple hair and blue eyes stood atop it. He coughed a little to get everyone's attention before speaking into a mic. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've all been waiting for, the annual sing-off. Remember, first prize is 350,000 euros. Sign-up sheets are over there, the man said excitedly while pointing to a booth to their right. She didn't know if it was just her excitement or the money that came with winning, but Naru ran straight to the booth and filled out a form. It was only when she was standing in line did what she was doing truly set in. What was I thinking? Oh my god, can I even sing? I mean, I know I can sing, but will I be able to sing in front of this crowd? She had a slight mental panic but was interrupted as her name was called. Her shoulders were tense as she walked over to the side of the stage where they chose their song. Deciding to go with a foreign song, she clicked on one and took her place on the stage, shuffling nervously as the music started. Taking a deep breath, she brought the mic up and sang. Set fire to the rain, I let it fall, my heart, and as it fell you rose to claim it. It was dark and I was over until you kissed my lips and you saved me. She didn't remember why she was so nervous before. This feeling, she loved it. My hands, they're strong but my knees were far too weak to stand in your arms without falling to your feet. But there's a side to you that I never knew, never knew. All the things you'd say, they were never true, never true. And the games you play you would always win, always win. She let her body move on its own as she danced around a bit. She was just going with the flow. But I set fire to the rain, watched it pour as I touched your face. Well, it burned while I cried 'cause I heard it screaming out your name, your name. When I lay with you I could stay there close my eyes. Feel you here forever, you and me together, nothing is better. 'Cause there's a side to you that I never knew, never knew. All the things you'd say, they were never true, never true. And the games you'd play you would always win, always win. But I set fire to the rain, watched it pour as I touched your face. Well, it burned while I cried 'cause I heard it screaming out your name, your name. I set fire to the rain and I threw us into the flames. When it fell, something died. 'Cause I knew that that was the last time, the last time. Sometimes I wake up by the door. That heart you caught must be waiting for you. Even now when we're already over I can't help myself from looking for you. I set fire to the rain, watched it pour as I touched your face. Well, it burned while I cried 'cause I heard it screaming out your name, your name. I set fire to the rain and I threw us into the flames. When it fell, something died 'cause I knew that that was the last time, oh. Oh, no, let it burn. Oh, let it burn, let it burn. The music ended. She was a bit out of breath but she didn't care about that right now. She never really had time as a child to find something that she was truly passionate about. The world she had once lived in left no room for small dreams and everyone had to fight to survive. She suddenly remembered herself singing as a child. She had forgotten that she'd love to do that. She used to sing to Inu all the time since he was her most frequent Anbu bodyguard. She now understood the amused looks that Kakashi would send her whenever she would hum or sing under her breath at team meetings. She bowed quickly and as she stood, thunderous applause followed. A blush burned her cheeks as she rushed off the stage and let the next person go. It was a while before everyone who had signed up had performed and now the judges were now huddled together and whispering so quietly that even her sharp hearing couldn't pick it up. There were a lot of good singers and she was only riding on her own opinion of her voice. She could be bad for all she knew. The judges suddenly broke apart and one stepped forward with a mic. We've come to a decision. Contestants, please step forward and ascend to the podium if you're called, he said before accepting a card from another judge. In third place, Kyle Mercoles, a brown-haired boy with blue eyes, walked up and accepted the bouquet of flowers, a bronze trophy and €1,000 check. In second place, Anne Leonard, a black-haired girl with brown eyes, accepted a bouquet, a silver trophy and a €50,000 check as she stepped onto the podium. Naru clenched her hands so tight that her nails bit into her palm, not that she noticed, she was too nervous. And last but not least, in first place, he stopped to build the suspense for a minute. Naru Namikaze, said. Blonde's eyes shot wide open. A grin soon broke out on her face as she walked forward and accepted the first place trophy, a bouquet of flowers and the check for €350,000. She gave a little whoop for joy and the people around laughed at her behavior. She ended up conversing with the other contestants and somehow found herself being dragged along to a party. She was casually sipping on a glass of Fanta when a woman approached her. She had long, curly black hair that was pulled into a high ponytail. Her skin was slightly tanned and she had yellow-green eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked with a small, polite smile as she set her glass down. The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a card. "My name is Teresa Angles. This is my card. Your performance was impressive. My boss has expressed interest in having you sign with her company. What do you say?" she said in a no-nonsense tone. Naru could only stare at her in shock. In her mind, she was screaming in happiness. This could be her big break. She was brought out of her thoughts by a cough. She smiled sheepishly and had a quick read over the card. The company was called Papillon Noir or Black Butterfly. "So will you sign with us?" Teresa spoke as she held a hand out to the small preteen. Without a hint of hesitation, a grin broke through her surprised expression. She reached out and shook the woman's hand.
For the first time, Teresa smiled. "It'll be nice working with you. I'll be your new manager, Naru."
It was at that time that, even if she didn't know it yet, Naru made another friend. 3 years later, it had been a long 3 years for Naru, but for the first time, she felt truly at home. She had worked hard with her new, current career over the past 3 years and had been rather successful. She had done quite a few modeling jobs but also did concerts around the city.
She'd continued to send out large groups of shadow clones every day so she could keep up to date with her information and so she wouldn't be dumb. She knew studying was a must now, unlike when she had been back in Konoha where she had thought studying useless.
She looked a lot different now as well. Her face had lost all of its baby fat and she had grown taller. She had filled out from a sad little A cup to her old large C, which made her a very happy fox. She had gotten her curvy figure back and had made sure to continue to work out so she had lean muscles as well.
She was currently wearing a white, off-the-shoulder top that hugged her curves and a pair of blue jeans with a pair of brown ankle boots. Her hair was pulled up into a high ponytail which reached her lower back. Her bangs framed her face.
After bugging Teresa and her boss, whose name was Kalos by the way, she had gotten them to agree to letting her go to school. She'd also, after a bit of contemplation, changed her name. She decided, since she's in a new world with a new life, then she might as well be a new person. Naru Namikaze has lived her life. Her name now was Mari Noir. It wasn't even a week after she had signed with their company that they found out that she was technically homeless. After a long scolding and a promise to tell them if she ever needed anything, they had provided her with, in her opinion, an overly pricey apartment. It was very spacious and had basically everything she could ever want. As she wandered towards the kitchen in her apartment, a picture of a familiar blonde caught her eye. She pursed her lips as sadness washed over her. Adrien. She missed him a lot. She had learned to control her new strength just over a year ago but had been afraid to go back to him. What she did was what she would count as abandonment. She didn't want to face his anger for her leaving him alone, so she didn't go back. She had seen that his own career had kicked off as well. She had seen him magazines. He was a pretty successful model now. Her heart clenched painfully at the thought of his pleading gaze from when she had last seen him. With a huff, she ripped her gaze away from the picture and went and made a light breakfast of waffles, pancakes, cereal and a tall glass of water. The school that she'd been applied for was called College Françoise Dupont. After finishing her breakfast, she washed up and left for school. She was not far from the school and had stopped by a road only to see a small old man making his way across the road even though there was a car speeding down the road. Mari let out an alarmed yell and ran into the road without a thought. She, being able to travel at high speed with ease, made it to the man in a second and had jumped to the overside of the road with a second to spare. The old man looked startled and he blinked rapidly before looking over his shoulder to see his savior. Her amethyst gaze burned into the man's gray one. "Are you okay? You're not hurt anywhere, are you?" she asked rapidly as she looked the old man over. The man raised an eyebrow and chuckled at her overly worried behavior. "I'm fine. No damage done, see?" He stretched his arms out to reveal that he didn't have a scratch on him. The man watched as the strange blonde teen sighed in relief before her watch caught her attention. Her eyes widened comically and she grabbed her forgotten bag. "Oh my God! I'm gonna be late, stay safe old man," she shouted as she sped off towards the school. The old man watched her go before pulling out a small brown box with red markings and smiling. He turned back in the other direction and walked away as if he didn't need the cane he was holding. With Naru she rushed into school with barely minutes to spare. She was quick with collecting her schedule from the principal. She slowly made her way to her classroom and opened the door. As soon as she was fully in the classroom, the whole room fell silent. She walked to the teacher. "I'm Mari Noir. I'm a new student," she explained simply and she nodded with a smile. "Take a seat then. Anywhere that's free will work," she nodded. She glanced around the room full of stunned faces before making her way to a seat in the middle, second from the front. A black-haired girl in the front gaped as she sat down. She wondered why. She wasn't even sitting for 10 seconds when an arrogant voice cut through the air. "That's my seat. Move." She turned and pinned a blonde girl with an uninterested gaze. "There aren't assigned seats. You move," she replied before turning around to face the front again. "No, that's my seat. Adrien sits here," she said, pointing to the seat in front of the one she currently occupied before tapping a nail on her desk. "So I sit here. Get it?" Her face reminded her of a child Sasuke. "Ah, how cute. Baby Sasu. Wait, Adrien." Her face remained stoic before a mischievous smirk crossed her face. "Adrien? Adrien Agreste? Well then, that changes things," she said as she pretended to grab her bag. A certain blonde entered the classroom just as she pulled her hand back and, as quick as lightning, flicked the girl. To make it worse, she added the faintest amount of lightning chakra to her fingertips so she got a bit of a shock to go with the pain. The girl recoiled before anger overtook her. Do you even know who I am? I'm the mayor's daughter. You will do what I say or I'll tell daddy. The whole class, even the teacher, were watching the interaction. It wasn't every day that someone stood up to the arrogant blonde, especially if the challenger was a well-known idol around the city. Naru sighed in annoyance as she turned to face the girl again. People swore they saw her eyes flash to red for a split second. Tell your father to bite my ass. Fight your own battles, you brat. That attitude will get you nowhere in life. Now, sit, she ordered in a dangerous tone. Before anything else could be said, the teacher broke the stunned silence. Chloe Bourgeois, go to a seat. Chloe was too stunned to answer. She was pushed into a seat by her little lackey. Class went on fairly smoothly after that. Naru didn't want to take the other blonde's shit. It reminded her of a young Sasuke who would demand power and think that he had the authority to order anyone around. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the curious gaze coming from the now occupied seat in front of her. She must have drifted off at some point because a hand touched her shoulder to shake her awake. She reacted on instinct and was out of her seat immediately and had pinned her supposed assailant to the floor with their wrists above their head. Her eyes were wide and alert. She was sitting on the person's torso when a familiar scent passed over her. She blinked as her vision cleared. Emerald eyes stared up at her in shock. She took in the familiar scent, the same eyes, same skin tone, same hair. They were both silent as they stared at each other in a varied amount of shock. What she'd done finally registered in her brain. She jumped up with a blush dusting her cheeks. Naru reached out and pulled him to his feet. She bowed at a perfect 90-degree angle. I am so sorry. I didn't mean it, it just happened on instinct, I'm so sore. A chuckle cut off anything else that she was going to say. She peeked up and saw Adrien was the source. It's all right. No harm done. You were just sitting in the same position for a while. I began to wonder if you were still with us for a moment there, he said before they were plunged into an awkward silence. She straightened into a standing position and shot him one last apologetic smile. My name's Adrien, by the way, Adrien Agreste. What's yours? He asked to break the silence. Her blood ran cold and she froze with wide eyes as those words left his lips. What's yours? He didn't remember her. She caught herself before she had a bit of a breakdown. Of course he wouldn't remember her. She looked different and had changed her name. My name is Mari Noir. Sorry, I gotta go, she said quickly and silently cursed the crack in her voice. She wasn't ready to see him yet, it seemed. Adrien looked panicked at her sudden change in mood. As she rushed past him, he reached a hand out and caught her wrist. Wait. What's the matter? He asked, his voice laced with nothing but genuine concern. Heat seemed to rush up from the wrist he grabbed and she shivered involuntarily. She ripped her wrist from his grasp without a word. Without even a glance over her shoulder, she ran out of the room and the school for that matter. As soon as she was out of the school her face lit up like a lantern. She was so embarrassed for some reason. Stupid blonde boys and their pretty green eyes. She didn't want people around the city to see her either, so she took to the rooftops. She landed on her apartment's balcony and rushed inside. A quick glance at the clock on the wall revealed it to be midway through lunch. Her knees gave out under her weight and she simply sat there staring at the ceiling. She didn't understand why seeing him again welled up so many emotions and brought them up from the surface. She didn't snap out of her daze until her phone suddenly beeped. A message. She ignored it. With her mind cleared, she finally took notice of a faintly familiar energy coming from somewhere in her apartment. Pushing herself up from the floor, she cautiously tiptoed through her apartment and into her bedroom. Everything seemed normal until she saw something out of place. Furrowing her brows, she approached her left bedside table and picked up the offending object. Bringing it closer to her face she rose an eyebrow. I don't remember getting this. The item emitting the strange energy was a small brown hexagonal box with a weird red pattern on it. A shiver went down her spine for an unknown reason. It was different from the brooch. The brooch gave off a lot less energy than this box and seemed empty in a way. She stopped for a moment to wonder if Gabriel had realized that he's missing some things yet. The TV suddenly turned on with urgent news appearing on the screen. Believe it or not, we currently have a real-life supervillain on our hands. No one knows what it's after. I ask that all Parisians stay inside their homes until this situation is resolved. Deciding that standing around would do nothing, she pulled the box open. Inside lay a pair of bright red earrings with black dots on them, 5 on each. Before she could even touch them, a bright pink light suddenly blinded her. She didn't let go of the box and had to squint her eyes for a minute before the light died down. A small pink creature with black spots on its head appeared from the light. It uncurled and locked eyes with her.
Bug, she wondered aloud. The creature looked offended. I'm not a bug, I'm a Kwami, said the apparent female. Kwami.
Oh, sorry, she mumbled. The Kwami giggled. No matter.
Simple mistake. My name is Tiki. I'm a Kwami and I grant you the power to transform into a superhero. Your special power is the lucky charm. You are the chosen one. You are needed to defeat Stoneheart and to capture the Akuma, which is what transforms a person into things like Stoneheart, and purify it. If I've been activated, then you should have a partner to help you. Just look for cat ears. All you have to say is, spots on. She finished as Naru put the earrings on.
Naru blinked. Spots on? As soon as those words left her lips, a bright light erupted from the earrings and Tiki disappeared within them. When the light disappeared, she looked over into her full-length mirror. A red mask with black spots appeared over her eyes and the hairband keeping her hair up was replaced with a long red and black ribbon that trailed down to her knees and seemed to almost float. A small top hat was tilted on the left of her head and was also red with black spots. It had a black ribbon tied around it. From the top of her head, her fox ears also were visible. Her clothes changed as well. She now wore a red, strapless top with black spots with a mid-thigh length skirt that had the same pattern. 2 black belts crossed over around her waist. Her hands were covered by red gloves and her feet now had a pair of black, steel-toed ankle boots on them. Around her neck was a simple red and black choker. Her tail swayed around in response to sudden happiness. Shall I still call her Ladybug or shall I call her something else? She stared at herself with a happy smile. I like this outfit, she said as she twirled around a bit. A scream on the TV took her back to the reason she had transformed in the first place. Reaching to her belt, she unclipped her little weapon, if you could even call it that, and gave it an experimental swing from her balcony. The yo-yo went flying and wrapped around something. Giving it a small tug, she was only slightly prepared for it to yank her forward. Geez. I feel sorry for anyone who got this that didn't have any sort of experience. I mean, come on, I've fought in a war and even I had a little trouble with this. She whined to herself as she flipped in the air. As she descended, she took notice of someone walking along a metal pole. They had a pair of cat ears on their head. So this is my partner, she muttered as she changed position. She landed silently with one foot on the pole to keep her up. Quietly creeping up behind the boy, she leaned forward with a mischievous grin. Having fun, are we, kitty? She whispered in his ear and watched with unhidden amusement as he literally jumped and fell. He landed in a roll. Rolling her eyes, Naru grabbed the pole and watched in slight fascination as it shrunk. She didn't pay much mind that she was now falling. She landed gracefully on her feet and made her way over to the fallen cat. She smirked down at him as he sat up pouting. And here I thought cats always land on their feet, she said with a chuckle as he began to eye her somewhat wearily. Mari held a hand out to the fallen blonde and watched in amusement as he accepted, albeit cautiously. Once he was on his feet again, he looked over the girl. Realization dawned on him. Oh. You must be the partner my Kwami told me about. My name's... Chat Noir. Yeah, Chat Noir. What's yours? He asked with a grin. She stopped for a moment before shrugging. I don't know. Haven't had time to think about it yet, she replied with a shrug. Her ears twitched as small vibrations went through the ground. Her head shot around and she stared in the direction of the stadium not too far away for a minute. Without another word, she took off in a sprint for a few meters before launching herself onto the closest roof. Chat Noir seemed to snap out of his surprised stupor and quickly used his pull to follow after her. It didn't take Mari too long after she had transformed to notice that she didn't have to hold back as much in this form. Nobody knew her or her actual capabilities, so she could be more free even if it meant having a stunned partner for the first few jobs. A serene smile graced her face as she sped off. The rush from traveling at high speeds never seemed to dim, and this was more fun than normal. She couldn't really go as fast in her civilian form out of worry of being spotted, so she had to slow down to keep an eye out. Her heeled boots clicked against the roof in a quick and steady rhythm as she ran. She arrived at the stadium just in time to hear a distorted male voice. Kim. Now who's the wuss? A slightly familiar voice practically screamed from the stone creature. Stoneheart advanced on a boy, who Mari suddenly recognized from their voice as someone from her class at her school. His name was Ivan, that was it. Before she could move another step, a long silver staff shot between the stone being and her scared classmate, who took this chance to hightail it out of there. Chat Noir landed in front of the stone supervillain a moment later. It isn't nice to pick on people that are smaller than you, he said with a mischievous smirk. Mari raised her eyebrow at his carefree attitude but shrugged. She didn't know much about Stoneheart right now. So she decided to observe him while he battled for the first few minutes to get an idea of his general skills. Stoneheart turned his attention to Chat and growled. "You mean someone like you?" he shouted as he went to squash the cat into the pitch. Chat jumped back before attacking with his staff. As he jumped back again, Stoneheart stopped and glowed for a second before growing.
A deep chuckle left the villain before he reared his arm back and smashed it right into Chat.
He went rolling across the field and stopped right by the feet of his fellow blonde hero who stared at him with a raised eyebrow. He grinned sheepishly while pushing himself up to his feet. "Got any bright ideas then?" he asked. Her eyebrows furrowed. "I've got nothing. Let's use our powers then," he said, and before she could stop him he grinned. Cataclysm. A black energy formed around his hand. He turned to her and his grin widened. "I got told that I have the power of destruction or whatever, watch." He placed his hand on the goalpost next to him and it immediately rusted over and crumpled apart. Chat then turned to their target and sprinted towards them. "Chat, wait!" she shouted, but it fell on deaf ears. He reached Stoneheart and smacked his hand on the rock being's foot. He blinked owlishly before slowly looking up. "Whoops!" was all he got out before Stoneheart booted him back towards his partner. She stared at him, clearly not impressed with his actions. "Really? Did your Kwame not explain anything to you?" she asked, exasperated. He had the decency to look sheepish at least. "I was really excited at starting my new life and I transformed before he could finish." He mumbled, his hand was scratching the back of his neck in embarrassment.
He looked back at Stoneheart. Where would the evil thing be anyway? He asked suddenly, and Mari couldn't stop the facepalm that followed his comment.
Her eyes darted all over the stone beast's body before they narrowed in its left hand. His left hand. "It's like one of those Russian dolls. The Akuma has to be there," she said, surprised. He shot her a grin, but she didn't wait for him to speak again. Mari sighed again. Deciding that she should try out her own power, she unclipped her yo-yo and threw it up while exclaiming, "Lucky charm." Red energy shot around before forming into some sort of clothing. As it fell, Mari grabbed it out of the air and confusion immediately flooded her mind. A wet suit? Glancing around for any sort of clues, some objects glowed red slightly as she looked at them. Grabbing the nearby hose, she put it in the wetsuit. Chat. The wetsuit. The hose. She thought quickly before throwing her yo-yo towards Chat and watching, clearly very amused, as the long wire wrapped around his legs multiple times. "Think fast," she said gleefully as she began swinging the poor cat in large circles before letting him go flying. Right into Stoneheart's right hand. She decided to ignore his shout of, "This girl's crazy." Chat did not look impressed, but she didn't care. Running forward, Mari jumped towards their target and allowed herself to get caught. Triumphantly, she watched as a dark purple object fell from his stony hand and onto the floor. Her eyes whizzed around before settling on a brown-haired girl who was filming the little scene not too far away. "Aaliyah, the tap," she shouted, and the other girl's eyes widened before she ran to it and turned it on as fast as she could. The suit that she held expanded quickly as it was flooded with water before it became too much and Stoneheart's hand burst open. In a second of being free, Mari darted towards the purple object and slammed her foot down on it. Whatever it was cracked and broke apart like glass. Stoneheart glowed before he transformed back into a confused-looking Ivan. Chat went to say something, but she didn't listen. She was more focused on the little butterfly that emerged from the object. "It's your job to capture and purify the Akuma," Tiki's voice echoed in her head. Swinging her yo-yo around a bit, it began to glow a brilliant white. "No more evil doing for you, little Akuma. Time to de-evilize." She threw her glowing yo-yo and watched as it flew towards the Akuma and trapped it shut inside. Bringing it back towards her, she swiped a gloved finger over it as the top split in half and opened. A pure white butterfly flew out. "Bye-bye, little butterfly." Just as she had reattached her yo-yo to her waist, hands grabbed said waist and span her around. A light blush dusted her cheeks when her eyes locked with emerald ones. "That was pretty cool. Well done, Foxy," he said with a wide grin stretching across his face. Mari broke out of his surprisingly strong grip and held out a fist. If possible, his grin widened even more. He nudged her fist with his own. "Pound it," the pair exclaimed jokingly before laughing as they managed to speak in unison. A beep caught their attention and pulled it to Chat's ring. "Oh, you better go before you transform back. I'll finish up here," she spoke quickly. Chat nodded, giving her a two-finger salute, before his staff extended and in the next moment he was gone. Glancing over her shoulder, she noticed that Ivan had yet to move. Walking over to the saddened boy, she knelt down to his level. She spotted a scrunched-up note nearby and grabbed it. You can't even gain the courage to tell Mylene that you love her, wuss. She read off of the paper and her brows furrowed. It was Kim. The boy next to her mumbled. Oh my. Don't listen to him, Ivan. You can tell people how you feel in your own time. Don't let some guy push you around. I'm sure you're stronger than that, she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He finally looked up and met her concerned gaze. How do you know my name, miss? He asked, suddenly curious. Her eyes widened slightly but, by some amazing luck, Aaliyah came rushing over with her phone. She knelt down and grinned. Amazing, spectacular. How did you get your powers? Did you get stung by a radioactive ladybug? Or bitten by a radioactive fox?
Mari looked at the camera somewhat nervously. She stood and turned. As she began to walk away, Aaliyah stared, speaking again.
Oh, I've got a ton of questions to ask you, miss. She stopped and glanced over her phone at the spotted heroine whose tail was swaying around gently to an unheard rhythm. Mari stopped. Lady Kitsune. Call me that, she said with a small smile. Aaliyah's eyes were sparkling at this point. Lady Kitsune. Super awesome, she muttered in obvious awe.
Using the girl's sudden daze to her advantage, she threw her yo-yo and swung away to the top of the stadium. Throwing a peace sign over her shoulder, she jumped away.
Time skip. An hour later. Thanks to this amateur footage, we now know the identities of our heroes, the news reporter exclaimed, clearly excited over Paris's new exciting activities.
Mari couldn't stop the giggle that bubbled up as she heard the excited tone. Normal people really are excitable, aren't they? She asked rhetorically.
Tiki was flying all around her apartment and hing and hing at just about everything. Mari made her way to the kitchen to find the little red Kwame trying to open the cupboard. Stifling her laughter at the sight, she reached out and opened it. What are you after, Ki? She asked with a highly amused smile painted in her face. Tiki huffed but couldn't help but smile. Cookies, she exclaimed, suddenly excited. Mari's sweat dropped. That's pretty random. Oh hell, who am I to judge? She thought as she grabbed a couple of chocolate chip cookies from a packet and put them on a plate for the hyper Kwame. Taking the plate and Tiki back to her room, she sat down and set the plate on the glass table by the sofa along the wall. Tiki immediately rushed to the plate and began gobbling down the cookies. I am pleased to announce that we will be organizing a huge ceremony in honor of our city's new protectors, Lady Kitsune and Chat Noir. Adrien stared at the screen dreamily. Lady Kitsune. Her name's Lady Kitsune, he muttered. Suddenly Plag flew up holding a glass with some sort of ice cream fruit thing. Ew. What is this? He demanded, sounding insulted. Adrien looked slightly angry at his comment. Seriously? My personal chef made all this? Plag suddenly smirked. If you expect me to get my energy back after a transformation, then I need to eat something more, delicate. Adrien sighed, giving in. Okay. What do you want? He asked, annoyance laced his voice. It took a few minutes to find it in the kitchen and soon they were back in his room.
Camembert cheese. Fantastic. All he eats is camembert, which means I'm gonna smell like stinky old cheese. He seemed to be more annoyed today with Plag than he'd ever been with anyone else in his entire life.
With another sigh, he stood and flopped down on his bed. I'm going to bed. Don't leave the room or else, he muttered. I want to see Milady again.
Mari sighed deeply while falling back onto her bed. A pleasant shiver ran up her spine. Her ears went pin straight. Someone must be thinking about me. I hope it's Chat. Wait a minute, what am I thinking? She sat up straight suddenly and looked over at Tiki, who was polishing off the last of the cookies.
Hey Ki, in the future, will the Akuma at least be a little challenging? That wasn't even a warm-up today. It was so boring. I think the most interesting part was making Chat fall off of his staff. Like damn. It was easier than taking care of an infant, she exclaimed. Tiki looked at her like she was crazy. Mari. That sort of thinking is dangerous. You could get hurt if you don't take this seriously. You're only human, she said disapprovingly.
Mari couldn't hold back a scoff. If they're all as weak as that puny thing, then I don't think I'll have any trouble. After all.
She reached her arm up to the ceiling, palm facing up. Short wisps of her silvery purple chakra drifted around her hand. Her eyes suddenly narrowed slightly before her pupils became slit and her fox features appeared. I never said I was human, she said as a smirk drifted across her soft features. Tiki could only gape at her new wielder. They're real, she shouted as she zoomed forward and inspected her fox features. Mari raised an eyebrow. Of course. They couldn't just appear out of nowhere, and they couldn't have come from you. You're a ladybug, she replied, deciding to point out the obvious. Ignoring her curious Kwame, Mari lost herself in thought. Her blonde-haired, green-eyed partner reminded her of her favorite blonde model. Bar herself, that is. They looked quite similar, but the hair and scent were different, so she brushed off the strange familiarity. I can't wait to see him again. An unexplainable tiredness swept over her suddenly. She didn't resist the sudden heaviness in her eyelids and let them drift shut as she fell into her land of dreams. Tiki smiled softly as her new partner fell asleep suddenly. She could see that this would be the start of a beautiful partner and friendship. Time skip. The next day Adrien was launching in his seat early the next morning, waiting for class to start. There was still a few minutes until the bell though. While everyone else had arrived already, Mary's seat remained empty. A smirking Chloe suddenly made her way over, donning her signature cocky smirk. Snapping her fingers over her shoulder, her little lackey ran forward and shoved some gum on the missing blonde's seat. Adrien was out of his own seat in a second and shot a seething glare at his cocky blonde friend. "Chloe, what do you think you're doing?" he exclaimed angrily. Chloe just raised an eyebrow and, surprisingly, waved a hand at him dismissively. "Just watch and learn, Adrikins," she laughed loudly as she walked back to her own seat. Adrien rushed over to his new potential friend's seat and immediately began to try and get the gum off. He didn't get very far as the new girl suddenly walked into the room. He didn't see her at first, but just as he was about to make a grab for the gum, an angry huff made him jump. He stiffened and turned around slowly from his crouched position, eyes wide with surprise. Purple eyes stared down at him, clearly not impressed in the slightest. "Well, Agreste, is this your little revenge for my little mishap yesterday afternoon? How petty of you," she said softly, but you could hear the underlying tone of anger lacing her voice. He flinches visibly. He tried to speak, but Mari just stepped past him. "I thought you were better than this." "Kitty," she mumbled just loud enough for her to hear, although she said his nickname in Japanese so she wouldn't give herself away. He hung his head slightly and went back to his seat as she made her way to another one. With a sigh, Mari leaned back in her seat, oblivious to the saddened green eyes on her from a few rows away as well as the victorious smirk that was shot her way by her least favorite blonde. Mari was officially unimpressed with the male blonde who sat a few rows in front of her. A slight cough broke her from her thoughts and she took a glance to the previously empty bench next to and in front of her. The seat next to her was now occupied by a meek-looking girl with dark blue hair and sapphire eyes. The seat in front of her was occupied by a tan-skinned girl with reddish-brown, ombre hair and brown eyes. She vaguely recalled reading up on them in the student files she'd borrowed from the school. These were Marinette Dupin Cheng and Elia Césaire, both fairly smart. The pair had become friends not long before she joined the school after a bully attempt. Mari," a female voice boomed from right next to her ear and she fell to the side in shock, clutching her ears in pain. "Aye, what's your problem? That hurt, ya know," Mari exclaimed as she straightened up, sending an exasperated look in the offender's direction. Elia just sent her a sheepish smile, but before she could speak, a sharp intake of breath drew their attention to the previously silent blue-haired girl beside Mari. "Oh my god, your ear is bleeding. Miss Bustier, Mary's ear is bleeding. Can me and Elia take her to the medical?" The tone of her voice showed her to be quite a bit more alarmed than one would expect from something so small, and Elia could only chuckle at the brunette's behavior despite being worried herself at the random injury, which she just realized she might have caused. Miss Bustier looked nearly as alarmed as Marinette for a moment before quickly putting on a mask of calm and walking over to the set of girls in the back. Even as the teacher turned her head to get a better look at her ear, Mari could still see the piercing green eyes boring into her out of the corner of her eye. The teacher quickly finished up with her small inspection before agreeing that she needed to be sent to the medical office. The three girls then proceeded to make their way out of the room while trying to ignore the curious, slightly concerned gazes of their classmates. As soon as the door was closed, Elia shot her an apologetic smile. "Sorry Mari, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know that your ears were sensitive. I was just trying to get your attention, and no matter how much I called, you were too spaced out to notice me calling, so I moved closer to see if I could snap you put of your days, and that still didn't work." She was cut off when Mari giggled quietly. After she stopped her small giggling fit, she turned to the flustered brunette. "You're babbling, Elia. It's fine anyway. I didn't even feel any pain after the initial shock from your shouting, so it's okay. It isn't as though you did it on purpose. You aren't like that Chloe girl," she replied with a small smile as she watched the girl calm down before she suddenly stopped and stared at her blankly for a few moments.
"You know my name," she sounded surprised, which in turn surprised her.
Raising a brow, Mari shot Elia a confused look. "Well yes, I don't see why it would come as such a surprise. You know my name and it isn't as if this is my first day," she answered, still confused as to the surprise from the other teen. It wasn't Elia who answered her unasked question. "I think she is more surprised that someone like you knows her name without her even introducing herself," Marinette answered, only to shrink back as Mary's eyes widened in what looked to be shock before narrowing. Realizing her mistake, Marinette rushed to explain herself. I didn't mean someone like you in a rude way, it's just, you are quite famous in Paris so we didn't expect to notice people who don't seem worth talking to. Again realizing that also sounded like an insult, she opened her mouth to speak again but snapped it closed when a hand belonging to one confused blonde. Ruffling the stumbling girl's hair gently, she laughed a little. I get what you're trying to say, don't worry. Let's start over from the beginning which we seem to have skipped over. It's a pleasure to meet the pair of you. My name is Marie Noir. She introduced while the flushed brunette finally calmed herself down. Taking a deep breath, Marinette went next. It's a pleasure to meet you as well. My name is Marinette Dupin Cheng and this is Elias Césaire. As you already know, we're in your class with Miss Bustier. The other two looked at her in shock for a few moments before they burst out laughing. Without realizing it and wanting to break the ice between them, Marinette had spoken in an overly posh voice. Still chuckling, Marie threw her arms over Elias and Marinette's shoulders and pulled them into a weird half-hug. And like that, I believe that we will be great friends. She spoke happily while the other two smiled and nodded in agreement, the ice finally broken between the three. Once again, Marinette caught sight of the blood that has come from her new friend's ear and changed moods in less than a second. Grabbing the blonde's wrist, Marinette began dragging her towards the nurse's office. Marie quickly grabbed Elia's wrist and the two resigned to their fate of being dragged along by the surprisingly strong, previously shy girl. After being pulled down some stairs and a few hallways, Marie was finally set down on a chair in the nurse's office. Sighing, Marie quickly spotted the nurse who asked what the problem was.
Chloe was getting angry at me for sitting in her seat and when I tried to ignore her she walked right up to me and screamed in my ear. I have sensitive ears you see and her shrill voice seems to have done some damage if the bleeding was any indication.
Elia's eyes widened as the blonde's explanations registered in her brain.
Why didn't she rat me out? She wondered as Marie winked in her direction when the nurse turned her back.
As the small examination continued, Marie began to find herself getting rather bored with her situation. She knew her ear already healed so there was no reason for her to even be here and yet, here she was. The nurse, who had at one point introduced herself as Miss Lena, turned back to her with some water and painkillers. There doesn't seem to be any long-term damage. Take these and have a rest in one of the available beds. You can go back to lessons in the afternoon if you feel okay. She explained and Marie just nodded despite her annoyance.
I'll see you two later then. Make sure to take good notes, I'll be counting on you to help me catch up what I've missed.
After promising to make good notes and to come back at recess, Marinette and Elia left an annoyed blonde to her own devices. After settling down in one of the beds, she thanked any possible god out there that the infirmary was free of anyone bar herself. Tiki decided that now was the time to come out of hiding. Slipping out of Mary's bag, the ladybug Kwame flew over to her bedridden foxy friend. No need to pout so much Marie, you'll be able to leave by lunch so all you have to do is find something to do. If you can't find anything then I'd be happy to explain more on the ladybug miraculous. She offered as she sat down and leaned on Mary's cheek. Hey Ki. Is it weird that, even though you're a ladybug-based Kwame, I've called myself Lady Kitsune? She asked softly. Tiki giggled at the sudden question. While it's true that a large majority of my previous holders have called themselves Ladybug, there have been a few that have decided against doing so. You are one of the first who actually have a valid reason to call yourself what you do, because of your fox features. The others who didn't go by Ladybug did it just because they wanted to be different. She explained and Marie hummed softly in interest. Well, it's good to know that I'm not the first. So have all of the previous holders of Chat Noir's Miraculous been called Chat Noir? She questioned curiously. It wouldn't hurt to learn more about the Miraculous he holds since he's my partner, right? She thought to herself as Tiki began to speak again. Just as with the Ladybugs, there were few who chose not to use the name Chat Noir. Their reasons though, I'm unsure. It happens a lot more frequently with people who are in possession of my Miraculous in comparison to those who hold Plag's Miraculous. Plag is the name of the Kwame that is partnered with the current Chat Noir. There are many Miraculous but 7 of them are stronger than the rest with 2 of those 7 being even stronger than the other 5 in that group. She continued and Marie happily absorbed the information. The Miraculous you hold is the Ladybug Miraculous which holds the power of creation which is seen through the use of Lucky Charm. Objects can be created to help with defeating supervillains that show up who want to destroy the peace. The Miraculous Chat Noir possesses is the opposite of this, his holding the power of destruction which can clearly be seen in his main attack, Cataclysm, which destroys objects upon contact. Suddenly, the Kwame's face grew darker as anger clouded her expression. The Miraculous that is missing has the power to create superheroes but, in the wrong hands, can be used to create villains instead. The Kwame paired with this Miraculous is called Naru. This is most likely the miraculous that has fallen into the hands of the one who created Stone Heart. Noru's miraculous has been missing for a while now, so it wouldn't be completely out of the question for some scum to dare misuse the miraculous.
Before any more could be said, the sound of the infirmary door opening alerted her to the presence of someone else.
Not really knowing what to do since she couldn't figure out who it was, Mari rolled onto her side, facing the door, and pretended to be asleep. Tiki quickly retreated back to her bag on the floor, but in her hurry had knocked over one of Mary's shoes, which made a quiet bang that the pair hoped the person didn't hear. Now that she was just sitting there, the names of other Kwamis began to frustrate her, almost as if she'd heard the names somewhere before, but she was sure that she hadn't come across the names since she'd found herself in Paris, or, as far as she can remember, even before that from back when she was still in the elemental nations. Her ears twitched when the familiar ring of the bell echoed through the halls. Frowning a little, she sighed for what seemed like the zillionth time that day. Already the end of the first lesson, huh? She mused as the door was closed behind the mystery visitor. Since the nurse had gone somewhere else, she quickly assumed the person who had entered didn't need the nurse and was here for some other reason. The curtain separating the beds from the rest of the office gently, and Mari finally caught a whiff of the person's scent. "What are you doing here, Adrien? You don't seem sick or injured. Do you have a headache or something? If not, then please leave. I'm trying to get some rest," she said quickly before he had a chance to speak, rolling over so her back was facing him. Adrien, not really knowing how to interact much with new people, crossed the space between them before firmly grabbing her shoulder and forcing her to roll onto her back before he placed his other hand on her other shoulder, so she had no choice but to acknowledge his presence. Mary's eyes were wide as they met a pair of surprisingly sorrowful eyes, her body tensing up as she remembered those same eyes which had been cast on her the same day she'd left him 3 years ago. "Look, I'm really sorry about the gum on your chair, but you have to understand that it wasn't me that put it there, it was Chloe. She did the same thing to another new girl to our class a couple of weeks ago, Marinette. She doesn't want me making new friends for some reason." Shaking his head suddenly, his grip on her shoulders tightened as he met her gaze, only to freeze when he found tear-filled eyes staring back at him. Realizing what was happening, Mary's eyes widened and she pushed herself into a sitting position, shrugging off the boy's hands while wiping away the tears before they could fall. "Why yeah, okay. I get it. Thanks for telling me, sorry for being snappy and not letting you explain beforehand." After assuring that her eyes were dry of tears, she turned back to the blonde boy. "So what are you doing out of class? Recess isn't for another hour yet," she pointed out, and the tips of his ears turned red from his embarrassment at being caught out. Rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly, he replied, but it fell on deaf ears as Mary's attention was pulled to his bag, which had fallen down by his feet. She stared at it blankly for a minute before her intense staring was broken by a flick to her nose.
Squeaking in surprise, the blonde female's hand flew to her face and covered her abused nose, a light blush covering her cheeks as the sound she made registered in her brain.
Adrien just laughed at her reaction. "So what's got you focusing so intently?" he asked after managing to quieten his chuckles.
To be completely honest, she was a little baffled by the boy's behavior.
"What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he asked teasingly, but she just rose a brow at the comment.
"Something in your bag moved. I was simply contemplating what it could possibly be is all," she began before pausing.
"And for someone who doesn't seem very adept at being social, no offense and all, you're being awfully friendly." Seeing his expression fall, she continued quickly. "Not that that's particularly a bad thing, I'm just not used to that sort of thing, if y'all get what I mean." She trailed off, hoping to everything that she hadn't just offended him. He nodded in understanding and opened his mouth to speak when, boom, the television in the corner of the room turned on automatically.
Breaking news. The supervillain that was supposedly defeated by Lady Kitsune and Chat Noir just yesterday is once again roaming the streets of Palace. Multiple beings just like the one seen yesterday are popping up as well, though none of them seem to be moving. No one is sure what is going on, and the being popping up seem to actually be innocent civilians from around Paris. Where are our city's protectors to help us rid Paris of this evil?
And with that the broadcast cut off. Adrien got to his feet abruptly, knocking the chair that he'd been occupying over in the process. Need to go check something real quick. Stay here, I'll be back as soon as possible," he shouted behind him as he dashed out of the room. As soon as he was out of sight, Mari snatched the curtain out of the air and pulled it closed. "Tiki, what's going on? Didn't we already deal with Stoneheart yesterday?" she exclaimed.
The small red Kwami looked thoughtful for a moment before speaking.
"Are you sure that you definitely purified the Akuma that had akumatized Ivan?" she asked quickly, and Mari nodded just as fast. "Then, most likely, whoever is in possession of the miraculous that's causing this filled the same Akuma with negative energy again and had it multiply, one going for Ivan and the rest of them transforming random, unsuspecting civilians. We don't have time for this, you need to transform, she exclaimed, her expression determined. You're right. Tiki, spots on, she muttered, and in a flash of light, her outfit had switched and she darted out of the conveniently open window, all the while unaware of the wide eyes that were staring through a gap in the curtain. The end. Thanks for watching, also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.